A new piece of evidence has emerged. It's not a theory, not a supposition. It's technical, real, and ignored by almost everyone. But it could change everything. Julia Wendell steps back into the spotlight, and the media's silence can no longer hide the tension this sparks. If this ember is real, the Madeleine McCann case could explode again. This time, with consequences. Sometimes all that separates silence from an explosion is a spark. Small, almost invisible, but enough to ignite what's been ignored for too long. Today that spark appeared, and as always, almost no one noticed. Amid the exhaustion of a case the world seems to have accepted leaving behind, a new piece has surfaced. Not a theory, not a stray memory, but concrete evidence. Technical, and so far ignored. Julia Wendell, the name many have linked to confusion and discredit, is back at the center of the conversation. But not in the way you might think. There's something strange about this return, because what should be making headlines is met with silence. What should be urgently investigated is being treated as if it doesn't exist. And the most unsettling part, what Julia holds in her hands, however small it seems, has the potential to reopen the Madeleine McCann case. Yes, not that one. The one you've seen in documentaries, series, debates, the one you thought was closed. Why isn't this evidence in the headlines? Why are the outlets that once fed on every detail of this mystery now silent in the face of new data? In this case, silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like control. And when they control what you're allowed to know, it's no longer journalism, it's suppression. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just builds, grows in the margins, hides behind routine, until something forces it to surface. What Julia Wendell is reviving now, amid public disbelief and mockery, isn't just about identity. It's about holding a possible fragment of the truth and being treated as a threat. Because more unsettling than being wrong is the possibility of being right, and no one wants to deal with that. Truth, when it gets too close, terrifies. That's why so many choose to ignore it. But every time we do, we push deeper a barrel that's still full of omissions, failures, fears, and one day it explodes. Today you'll see what they tried to hide. You'll understand why this new evidence, however small, is a danger to those who rely on silence. If this spark is real, everything you believe could change now. So stay, because the fuse has already started to burn. What if silence isn't safety, but a fuse being quietly prepared? In 2007, the world stopped at the news of Madeleine McCann's disappearance, a 3-year-old girl taken from her room while she slept in a resort that was supposed to be synonymous with safety. For days, weeks, months, the entire planet followed a search that promised answers. But as time passed, those answers never came. And what should have been an investigation turned into a saga of versions, failures, and distractions. The outcry was genuine, but the handling of the case, that wasn't. With every poorly confirmed lead, every dismissed suspect, a smokescreen formed. The mistakes of the Portuguese police, the involvement of Scotland Yard, the pressure from the British press, the string of contradictions, and in the midst of it all, Madeleine's parents, transformed from victims to suspects by public opinion, judged without evidence, defended and attacked at the same speed. After years of exposure, the case went cold, not because it was solved, but because it became too inconvenient to keep in the spotlight. And it was in that gap that Julia Wendell appeared, a young woman from Poland, raised by a family that always felt strange to her, with no official birth records, gaps in her past, and physical traits that somehow connected to images of Madeleine. Her story emerged first as curiosity, then as controversy, and soon as mockery. The internet did what it does best, reduced the complex to caricature. Julia became a meme, a joke, an exaggeration. But amid all this, one real detail slipped by almost unnoticed. While many were busy discrediting her, Julia delivered something documented, a concrete lead tied to DNA data that in any other context would have been deemed significant. Except here, it was treated as noise. There's something strange about how the media chooses what stays silent. Julia Wendell didn't just have her story rejected. She was expelled from the conversation, quickly, forcefully, as if her presence could cause more damage than her supposed lie. No newspaper dove into the tests. No major network asked, what if? It's as if there's a fear greater than the truth, the fear of reopening what's been conveniently closed. But this isn't new. The case of Amanda Knox, accused of murder in Italy, was a media con unraveled the narrative. Stephen Avery in the US spent nearly 2 decades in prison until ignored evidence changed everything. In both cases, the pattern was the same: a system that prefers error to discomfort, a press that prefers spectacle to honest doubt, a society that prefers a simple story to a truth too complex to digest. With Julia, the pattern resurfaced, and the question almost no one dared ask now looms like a dull thud. What exactly are they trying to avoid? Truth has a cost. Sometimes it's exposing who got it wrong. Other times it's showing the error wasn't accidental. And when that happens, silence isn't protection, it's a pact. Julia may not be Madeline, but what she revealed, or rather what her reappearance stirred, ignited something many worked hard to keep extinguished. When the air is thick with silence, any spark startles, and now it seems someone struck a match. But what if what they buried wasn't a mistake? It was a threat to the official version. When the envelope arrived, it looked like any other. White, discreet, sealed like all those from labs. But inside was the kind of answer that brings more questions than certainty. The new DNA test conducted on Julia Wendell, unlike previous ones, followed an advanced mitochondrial tracing protocol. It wasn't commissioned by tabloids. It wasn't done for clicks. It was carried out by an independent institute outside the usual circuit, with comparative samples from family profiles linked to the McCann case, obtained legally and validated. The result, a highly unusual partial match with Madeline's maternal profile. Not enough for direct confirmation, but enough to suggest the possibility exists, and that it should, at the very least, be rigorously investigated. But it wasn't. What followed wasn't the opening of a new line of inquiry. It wasn't a headline. It didn't spark a press conference. What followed was nothing. Not even a mention in major newspapers. Not a whisper on the pages that once covered every step of Julia's life with sarcasm. The test was simply set aside, as if its existence threatened more than it clarified. And this is where the tension shifts, because until then, we could think it was all just confusion. But now, with concrete evidence ignored by those who should investigate it, the silence starts to feel like a choice. A cold choice, calculated, strategically convenient. What came next was even more disturbing. During data cross-referencing, independent investigators found archived records never mentioned in Netflix's McCann series. Reports from 2008 indicated that, at the time, information about possible movements of unaccompanied children near the resort had been received, but officially never investigated. One of those reports mentioned a girl with a scar near her right eye, moved out of the country under a false identity. The description, vague until now, matched 2 specific traits of Julia. None of this appeared in the documentary. None of it was mentioned in interviews, not even as a dismissed hypothesis. And that's when the barrel creaks. Because if this mitochondrial evidence, even if not definitive, points to something worth investigating, why isn't it being treated as such? Why didn't the ignored material in the official archives surface when the whole world was watching? Maybe because, deep down, it's not just about uncovering the truth, it's about protecting the version of the truth already sold to the public, the one that comforts, that closes, that lets us move on without disturbing the rubble. But it's in the rubble that truth often still breathes. The question here isn't whether Julia Wendell is Madeline. The real question, the one burning behind it all, is why don't they want her to be? And that question is a match struck in silence. Some things we feel before we understand, and some truths only hurt when they fall in silence. The question isn't if this evidence matters. The question is, why doesn't anyone want it to matter? The first reaction was silence. Not empty silence, but the kind loaded with tension when no one knows exactly what to say. When Julia Wendell's new evidence came to light, the system, press, experts, authorities, acted as if they hadn't heard. And, in part, maybe they didn't want to hear. A few smaller outlets reported it, dryly, with caveats. Others simply omitted it, as if not seeing was safer than admitting something there made sense. But the real impact didn't happen in journalism's backrooms. It happened among people, ordinary people like you, who followed this case for years, who watched documentaries, read articles, formed opinions, and now face a new piece that doesn't fit any comfortable narrative. And that's the point where everything changes. Because we're no longer dealing with the possibility that this story was shaped over time by deliberate choices of silence. And realizing that is like turning on a light too bright after years in the dark. You see more, but you also feel exposed. The new evidence alone doesn't solve the case, but it shatters the certainty that everything had been said. It disrupts the safe zone where many chose to stay. And in doing so, it forces a collective decision. Keep pretending nothing's changed, or accept that maybe we've been wrong all along. Julia, for her part, hasn't changed her tone. She didn't come shouting victory or demanding headlines. In a quiet live stream surrounded by hostile messages and mocking emojis, she simply said, "I'm not trying to convince anyone. I just wanted someone to listen without laughing." That sentence hit like a stone, because there was no spectacle, just someone trying to light a match in a place where everyone pretends it's all dry. But the wood is damp with fear, and fear catches fire easily. What's striking here isn't the size of the evidence, it's what it represents. A piece out of place, a move that escapes the script, a subtle threat to the comfort of those who thought they'd understood it all. And this is where the barrel shifts. It stops being a risk of explosion and becomes something else, a sign that something's still alive inside, even if buried for years. The question now isn't whether the evidence is enough to reopen the case. The question is, what will we do with what it's reignited? Because if this story stays silenced, it won't be for lack of elements. It'll be for fear. And that fear isn't just the authorities. It's ours too. Fear of admitting we were misled. Fear of discovering our certainties were fragile. Fear of facing a system that prefers to protect its version over seeking real justice. But some truths, however hard, liberate the moment they step out of the shadows. Because a spark doesn't destroy when it illuminates. It only shows what was already there, hidden. The real conflict is no longer in the documents or the tests. It's within those watching all this and deciding whether they can still pretend nothing happened. The truth has made it this far, not with fanfare, but with persistence. And now it burns. Silent, uncomfortable, undeniable. And if the truth explodes, will we stand with those who set it free or those who tried to bury it again? Some think when truth appears, everything falls into place, that it brings relief, answers, closure. But real truth only amplifies the pain, because it doesn't close wounds, it shows some never healed. Truth isn't an ending, it's what happens when we stop pretending the story's over. And that's what this new evidence did. It didn't solve the case, but it also didn't let it be buried for good. It broke the comfort of the official narrative, scratched the smooth surface of forgetting, and showed there's something underneath. Something we don't want to see, but that insists on breathing. It feels like hearing a noise from upstairs in an empty house. You try to ignore it, make up explanations, turn up the TV, but deep down you know it wasn't the wind. Something's there, and eventually you either climb the stairs or live haunted by what you left behind. This evidence tied to Julia Wendell, however partial, fragile, or inconvenient, is that noise. A technical, real datum, not born in forms or speculation. Yet it was ignored, forgotten, treated as an inconvenience, not a lead. And that says more about us than about her. It says that, as a society, we're more willing to protect a story than seek the truth. That when truth threatens what's been comfortably built, it's smothered. Not for lack of evidence, but for an excess of convenience. I look at this and feel a strange mix of anger and sadness, because I wonder, how many other truths were buried like this? How many pieces of evidence were left unread? How many stories were silenced because they didn't fit the headlines already written? And maybe what bothers me most is this: realizing the problem isn't just the system. We accept it too. We turn our faces away. We get tired, and in that tiredness, we choose to forget. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Because truth shakes everything. It disturbs, it erodes. It tears away what little emotional stability remains in cases like Madeleine McCann's, which we followed for years as if it were fiction, but was never a story about who, but how. How this could happen. How so much was omitted. How we let the case die without answers. And when something new emerges, even if it's not definitive, our first reaction isn't curiosity, it's defense. Is it real? Is this girl just seeking attention? Will this all just end in nothing? Sure, it could end in nothing, but if we don't let it begin, if we reject the fire before it gets close, it no longer matters if Julia is or isn't who she believes she might be. What matters is what she revealed without meaning to, that there are still unasked questions, uninvestigated data, and people willing to strike a match in rooms where everyone prefers to keep the lights off. And maybe that's the greatest value of this story. It reignited. The powder keg everyone said was empty still pulses inside, and the spark was small, but enough. If you've made it this far, it's because you felt something. Even if it was discomfort, even if it was anger, doubt, or that strange sense that something's wrong, but you don't know what yet, and that's okay. Not every truth reveals itself at once. Sometimes it shows up bit by bit, in the crack, in the unease, in the lingering question. That's why I'll keep lighting these torches here, even knowing many will prefer to put them out, even knowing it might come at a cost. If you believe these stories still need to be told, if you think there's more here than what they let us see, then subscribe to the channel. This isn't just content, it's a kind of silent resistance, a reminder that not everything's been forgotten, that there are still those who search. And comment, tell me what you felt. It can be just a sentence, a discomfort, a vent. I'll read them, one by one. If you stayed until the end, write, I am the spark. Just that, no explanation. Those who felt it will understand. If this story moved you, the super chat isn't a button. It's a gesture, a way to say, keep going, a silent symbol that this truth is yours too, that you didn't just watch, you took a stand, because some stories the world tries to erase. But those who send a super chat here aren't just spectators, they're part of this flame. And if one day this all explodes, may we look back and say, I was there when the first match was struck. Not every silence is forgetting, and some truths only need a spark.